Okay, so would like to welcome everyone to this, our first speaker series with the Irish Stammering Association of 2026. It is great to see all the people here, and then we have a brilliant guest to just kind of start us off the speaker series for 2026. So I would just like to introduce Dori Holt. Um, so Dori Lenz Holt became an advocate for families with children who stutter since the publication of her book, Voice Unearthed. Hope, Help, and a wake-up call for parents of children who stutter in 2011. Voice Unearthed was inspired by research and experiences she had with speech therapy for her young son who stuttered. In 2023, she published her second book, Voices Unearthed, the impact of early childhood intervention on those who continue to stutter. Voices Unearthed featured analysis and interviews of 60 individuals, a combination of parents with older children who stutter and adults who stutter, to better understand how early intervention impacted of life, both short and long term. Dori engages with universities in the United States and internationally, and is a guest contributor to various podcasts and blogs. She is an honored contributor to the book Stammering Pride and Prejudice, the difference, not the effect, which was published. In addition to the Voices Unearthed, Dori has started the Voices Unearthed Facebook group, which was founded and facilitated by is actually now at a members of 4,300 members, which is the largest online parent support group um, for 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 this topic in the world. In this speaker series, the Dori will focus on the importance and understanding the options for intervention and being aware of the risks and the consequences of some of those options. So I would just like everyone to give Dori just a warm welcome. So thank you, Dori.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really am very happy to be here. Um, yeah, our son started to stutter when he was about 2.5. He's going to be 30 in May, so it was a long time ago. Um, but the first thing he did was open his mouth and nothing came out. He didn't have repetitions. He didn't, repeat. He was blocked. I kind of ignored it for a while, hoping it would just go away. And then finally, we took him into a speech therapist. And of course, he didn't do anything unusual there. Um, so they said, go home. It's probably just developmental. He'll be fine. If he's not, bring him back. So after about, I don't remember, 2 or 3 months, it was not getting any better at all. And so we started down the path of speech therapy. We ended up over the next 6 years or so engaging with about 6 different speech therapists, mostly due to turnover in our local clinic, but I also ended up reaching out to some speech therapists who were in the metro area. At the time, we were living outside of Minneapolis, and it was really interesting when I look back on it that we had everyone from a speech therapist who had very little experience with stuttering to someone who was certified by ASHA to treat stuttering. And honestly, I didn't see any difference in the two because the focus was all on fixing him, was all on using speech tools to stutter less or stutter more easily. And at one point when he was 5, that's when we did connect with a speech therapist who was certified. And I remember her saying that, well, there's a window of opportunity, kind of starts to close when he's about 5. And, that what's neuroplasticity in the brain, just opportunity. And I thought, man, I'm going to squeeze him right through that window because I was just desperate. We were just so frustrated. Um, so I jumped in, we did our special time and at home almost every day and we would try and talk about it a little bit, but generally speaking, from my perspective, the therapy really didn't vary from therapist to therapist. It was all speech tools and techniques and an effort to get him to talk with less stuttering. Um, and so by the time he was 9 years old, he decided that it was easier to just not talk than to use those speech tools. And, he could use the speech tools quite well when he was with a speech therapist for that short amount of time, but outside of that setting, he was not able to use them at all. And of course, I, as a totally ignorant mother, I had no idea. I didn't know anything about stuttering. And I assumed that the speech therapist knew what they were doing and that they wouldn't do any harm. And unfortunately, they did harm. Let's say by the time he was 9, he just quit talking. And that was not the outcome that we were looking for. Um, at the time, we we attended our first conference out in Washington, D.C. I think it was an NSA conference. And I was really surprised by the lack of options. All I heard about and of course, we didn't attend every workshop, but I was really surprised. We thought we were going to go out and kind of have a one-stop shop, where we'd find all these different things to choose from, ways to go, and we'd, find one that felt comfortable for us. Well, that wasn't the case at all. Back in 2004, that was, it was all stuttering modification and fluency shaping. Um, so we got back from that conference and I decided I was going to write a book. I'm a writer by trade. Um, and I wanted to, my first intention with the book was to just really jump in and really start to understand this therapy. What was the evidence behind it? Why were we having such an unfortunate outcome? And, um, we really, well, the book I ended up writing ended up being a much different book than what I started out to write because we ended up connecting up with a kind of a maverick speech therapist out of a university about an hour and a half from where we were. He was Jerry Halverson is his name. Any of you familiar with Jerry? He's a character. He is a character. But a friend of his had read a paper I had written for the ISAD conference back in 2004 and connected with me and said, I have someone I want you to meet. And I thought, well, I'm not putting this kid into any more speech therapy. This just isn't working. So I he connected us with Jerry. Jerry got me on the phone, and we talked, and he said, well, why don't you come? We met up at a restaurant about halfway between each of our houses. Why don't you come and meet me? But don't tell Eli that I'm a speech therapist. So I think my husband and I went first and talked to him. And then he invited Eli and I out to his ranch the following week. Now he was semi-retired and had 50 horses. And at the time, Eli just loved horses. He was just really into that. Um, so we started and kind of a weekly connection with Jerry. For 1 week, one week we would go out to the ranch. Eli had no idea Jerry was a speech therapist. He certainly didn't look or act like any of the speech therapists, that he had seen. Um, and Jerry would basically, it was my husband Peter and I who were in therapy. It wasn't Eli. Jerry was modeling for us ways to get Eli talking again because he said, and this is the first thing that really made sense to me, he said, we need to get Eli talking again because his previous therapy sucked all the fun right out of it. I thought that makes sense to me. Um, so over the next 3 years or so, we were going, 1 week we go out to the ranch, and the following week we'd meet up with Jerry at a restaurant halfway in between, and he would give us his observations and kind of help us, to help us to shift away from the fix and towards just getting the kid talking and keeping talking fun and easygoing. Um, and that he did ask us to not, he did not want Eli to know he was a speech therapist. So that was a little awkward, but you know, Eli was 9. He didn't question. He loves the horses. It was fine. Mom would drive an hour and a half, each way to help this old guy out with his horses. He didn't question that. But it was quite an experience over those 3 years. And the things that Jerry modeled for us was um, how to kind of stay away from asking questions, but make comments. And that was really interesting to me because um, I could say, oh, I had a great breakfast today, rather than saying to him, what'd you have for breakfast? Parents were always questioning. Um, but just modeling for us ways we could make comments. And then, if he feels like that's something he wants to talk about, he'll talk about it. And if he doesn't, then he won't. I liked that idea. Just and better listening, to not get all bent out of shape when he would be fighting with his brothers or, would come to me saying, oh, my brother hit me or whatever. To let him talk, let him get it out. He needs to know that you're there to listen and that you can handle it. And that was, as part of trying to get him to talk about his stuttering and how he felt about it. Also, Jerry really encouraged me to lighten up, to, not be so picky about things like say please, say thank you, you know, use your napkin, all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I just visited my sister-in-law this weekend, and she said she had never seen a more laissez-faire mother in her life. So I don't think I was too overly, um, perfectionist, but just the basic things. So just let him. He's just let him be. Just let him be. And then taking the lead on things. He has twin brothers, older twin brothers. So they were in the lead, pretty much everything. So I looked for opportunities for him to kind of be the one in charge. And we did that with 4-H. We homeschooled, so we had a homeschool group where there were younger kids that he could interact with. And um, yeah, it was just really just changing making a big shift in our minds as to what intervention was going to look like. Jerry wanted us to keep it fun and just be crazy, and I don't have any problem doing that. I embarrass my children all the time, and I continue to do that. Um, but after about 3 years, I was working on the book. I was doing research, around what was the evidence behind these strategies? Where did they come from? Kind of trying to get some context for the approach. And I think I felt like I I needed context. I needed to understand how, I mean, these speech therapists were all lovely people, they they didn't intend to cause harm. So how did this happen? What was the history of this therapy and how did we get here? And it was interesting. I started writing the book, and I think in 2004, probably after that first conference, was when we first got access to the internet. So it's a whole different world now, but I didn't have access to all that information. Um, and I finally just, ended up writing the book I wished I could have read when we were starting out on this journey. This is what I wished we would have understood. And that I'm sorry, I have some notes here. You can see it looking down. Um, so yeah, I ended up writing the book I wish that we could have read, the information I wished we had had. I wished we had understood the uncertainty around intervention for children, the disagreements that exist, because they really, the disagreements are pretty major. And also, even though somebody is specialized or has a certification to treat stuttering, even they disagree with what the outcomes should be, what the approach should be. So when a parent walks in to a speech therapist office, they have no idea what they're looking for. They have no idea there's anything to choose from. They have no idea, the background and the harm that can be done. And in our case, harm was done. I remember going to a conference, they're saying, our children don't need to be fixed. And I thought, you know what? But he does in ways that we never imagined. He was depressed, he was quiet, he was having problems sleeping. There were all kinds of things going on with this kid. So yeah, he needed to be fixed. Um, so after about 3 years, I decided I'd better tell Eli that Jerry's a speech therapist because he'd come to my desk, he might see what I was writing. And so I sat him down. He was about 12. I sat him down and broke it to him. He was just like, really? I said, really, Jerry is a speech therapist. He thought that was so funny. And he just thought it was really funny. Well, at the time, Jerry was starting a stuttering group kind of session once a month at the university where he had taught, and invited us to come, to present to students or to give information to students. So we started doing that. And the first one we went to, Eli said, "Can I bring a book?" Thought he was going to be really bored. Um, he didn't open that book once, and he kept coming for the next, all the way through his teen years. He would come once a month and, oftentimes talk with these students. And it was really fun. When I wrote my second book, I actually interviewed Eli, like as I did everyone else. And, he said that those getting up in front of those students and talking was he just loved it so much. He was in charge. He was the expert. He just loved doing that. And he said when he went off to college, he still stuttered, but not as severe, not with all the quite as much tension. But he said getting up in front of an audience, it was just fun because it had been so fun, at these stuttering group meetings. Um, so that was great. They were pretty crazy. These meetings were, we'd have adults who stuttered. I was usually the only parent. Um, and then speech therapists would come, but it was usually a room full of students of speech therapy. So, by the time I got done with the book, I told that story. I talked about what I had learned about the research. And that's one thing and I know, Anita, you've been through this. Well, show us the evidence. As long as something is said, as long as they say, oh, it's been through an evidence-based process, it must be good. That's just not the case. That's just not the case. And, I think parents need to understand that, and speech therapists need to understand that. They're told this is evidence-based, this is best practice. But in reality, oftentimes, the goal is percent syllable stuttered. Well, that varies so much. How do you measure that? Um, and even what is stuttering? They have had people try to do counts, percent syllable stuttered, and different people were all over the place with what they thought was a stutter. Um, and some of them have very small, what do you call it in research? Very small. It was a small group that they had. The time is limited, of course. They can only do research on a child for a year or so, I suppose, for follow-up. So anyway, there are just a lot of things about that research that didn't hold up. And it was good. I mean, it was really helpful to understand that. The researchers, they meant well. They are trying to figure this out, but they don't have it figured out. They just don't. So my feeling was, 80% of children who start to study are going to see that behavior pretty much subside by the time they're 7. So you have this 20% who, for whatever reason, don't see it subside. And I know we have indicators, but they're so vague, they really can't be applied to specific individuals, male, female, in the family, not in the family, is studying in the family, not in the family, so on and so forth. So we don't know. We really have no way of knowing which children are going to continue to stutter. And the 80-20 seems to be pretty consistent whether or not a child engages in intervention in speech therapy um, in the early years. So, as with our son, his first 9 years, he was told he didn't talk right and he needed to talk differently. And he apparently was going to be one of that 20%. Had I known that, you know, I think we would have approached things much, much differently. So the thing is that um, the real damage comes when kids start to disengage, they become quieter, they become filled with shame, the iceberg, probably know the iceberg, shame and guilt and embarrassment. And that's the real toll that it takes, that stuttering can take on a child, whether or not they get therapy. So in my opinion, that's kind of what we need to treat. We don't know if they're going to keep stuttering or not. But what we need to do is give them a foundation that they can draw on to stay engaged in the world around them, and to make decisions and pursue their passions and make friends and all that sort of thing. So let's see, about 2021. Sorry, I started working on my second book. And what inspired that was I had been accused somewhat by some of the leaders in the field that I was universalizing my experience. I thought, since this is what happened to me, then it happened to everybody. And of course not, but on the other hand, I've talked to a lot of people over the years, and a lot of people resonated with our frustration and had similar experiences. So I thought, I'm going to recruit a group of people who are part of that 20% who continued to stutter beyond the childhood years, and find out from them, what did you find helpful in your intervention as a child, and what did you find not so helpful? And it was really interesting. I interviewed 60 people. 30 were parents, usually of older children. I have a couple of parents with younger children, but mainly older children and then adults, because I wanted to get the long view. I felt that was very valuable right now. And when I would be asked, how's your speech therapy going? Oh, it's great. You don't know what the long-term or even short-term ramifications are going to be. And it's hard for a parent to admit that we're doing the wrong thing. So I really wanted that long view. I interviewed people from all over, and I transcribed all the interviews and edited them, and I went through them with a fine-tooth comb to find reoccurring themes. What did these people share? What were the same kinds of experience they had had? And it was it was it was very I think it was very, very useful information. And I'm very pleased to say that I think my work was mentioned twice at the Oxford Stammering and Cluttering Conference by two researchers. So I'm very honored for that. And it's just really good to know that, some of those people out there really respect the effort I put into this. I'm not a professional researcher. But the the I was going to look at my what I learned after talking to those people and kind of, going through the interviews, is really what shaped this book. And I got a good feel for, what wasn't helpful. I got a good feel for what was helpful. And quite honestly, and I hated to say this because it sounds so, made up, but 100% of the people I interviewed who had had speech therapy focused on stuttering modification, fluency shaping, felt that it did more harm than good, that it contributed to a lifetime of trauma, and my son's still dealing with it. Um, so that, to me, that was interesting. 100, literally each person. And about a third of them knew of my work, but the rest of them did not. So it wasn't like they came in knowing, what my point of view was. I truly was looking forward to having some, things to give parents and say, this is what these people found helpful. And I did, and that they found helpful is basically good parenting. They, let them get involved in the help them pursue their passions. Parents, referred to sports, theater, writing, art, just anything that the kids really became really good at or were really interested in, and they said that that's when they started to gain more confidence. That's when they started to get rid of the fear and go out and go ahead and engage with people. So that was huge. I think another thing that came up was meeting other kids who stutter. And I do want to say, I probably have to back up almost to the beginning. My major focus is children under 7. I do not speak for adults who stutter. If they find something useful, then it's useful. I'm not going to argue with that at all. And I think, every adult is different. So my goal is to help educate parents so that children stay engaged in the world around them and, have a minimal impact of the fear and the shame and the embarrassment and the trauma. How can we minimize that? We can't probably get rid of it because it's tough for a kid who stutters. Let's face it, we can't make it all go away. But what do these kids need from us in order to live full lives, full engaged lives? And that's what I learned talking to these people. Um, I really appreciated these folks so much. I just want to look quickly. What was truly helpful. Yeah, connecting. It's kind of ironic because my own son did not like going to the conferences, but many of the people I interviewed felt that was a big turnaround for them and for their children to have their children meet other kids who stuttered. Eli, I took him to 2 conferences and he just hated it. And, I think that it would have been really helpful if a speech therapist could have said, why is that? Or could have helped me work with him to work through that because it was shame. I don't, do I look like that when I talk? Do I sound like that when I talk? he didn't want anything to do with it. But I just took it at face value and thought, well, okay, if you don't enjoy this, but I continued to go to conferences without him. So finally, just last year, I said, Eli, he's 28, 20, how old is he? He's going to be 30 in May. I said, okay, I'll pay your way if you'll come to the Friends Conference with me. And okay, so he comes, and at the end he gave a little speech, you know how they do that closing thing where they're all talking. He said, "My mom's been trying to get me to come here for 20 years, and I only have one thing to say. Mom, you were right." And he's going back to Chicago this year. He can't wait to get there. It was really good for him to connect. And I really wished I had gotten more guidance in trying to get to the bottom of why he didn't like it. What was it about? What was it about it that he didn't like? And I wished I'd pushed him a little more. I kind of just, well, okay, fine, that's what you want, you know. But you know, we all have that what the post guilt or whatever when you're a parent. So let's see. I think, you know, the kind of intervention that seems to be becoming more popular now, and I'm so happy for that, is intervention that includes the family. It's more of a holistic approach. You got the Palin Center in London. I think they do a really good job. The American Institute for Stuttering in New York, I think they do a really good job. The Arthur Blank Center in Texas, they do a really good job. And Vivian Siska and her work with avoidance reduction therapy is fabulous. So parents have a right to understand these are options. These are different ways to approach it. And at least at minimum, there's going to be a little red flag when things start going downhill, you know. Um, Maybe we need to look at something different. But yeah, it's really encouraging because I know so many of the younger speech therapists are really, really embracing a much different approach to therapy. And I'm very encouraged to see that, very encouraged. Um, so I don't know. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I think we can probably open it up there, Dory, too, because I actually say our members probably have some questions. Because and just said to thank you very much for kind of sharing that story.
Now we have this awkward time.
Yeah,
I'm kind of used to it. I can wait. I can hold off.
Um, okay, can I jump in here?
yeah,
Please.
brilliant.
Hi Dori. It's
Hi,
lovely to
Fran.
meet you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm a person who stammers, and my daughter, who is almost 28,
Hmm.
also stammers. And you were saying that your experience resonated with other parents, and it does. It resonated with me. But I was one of those parents when she was 4. I was like, I need to get this fixed because she's starting school, and I don't want her to, and I don't, whatever it takes, I'm gonna. So we did speech therapy, and again, I had mixed experiences of speech therapy over the years. I would have to say all the speech therapists were well-intentioned,
Hmm.
if not well-informed. We had a lot of fluency shaping. We did experience some really good speech therapists who didn't focus on the stammer. We did a brilliant speech therapist. She was about 12, who spent a lot of time doing like problem solving around how you negotiate life with a stammer. So that was really good. But I think your point about meeting other children who stammer was really was a real breakthrough for her.
Hmm.
And she connected with what was at the time our time, which is the Stuttering
Hmm.
Association of the Young. She
Say
connected with
yes.
them, and it was having all of those others, and then the Irish Stammering Association did a lot of work. So it was for her, it was all of those additional supports. out there. She continued on and off doing speech therapy. But I suppose my that's a long way to get to my question is your son is now almost 30. So what is his experience now as an adult who stutters, um, despite the fact that he may have had poor experiences when he was young?
Yes, by the time he got kind of into high school and beyond that, he became much more social, much more comfortable talking around people. He ended up going to college. I always say I'm just along for the ride. He went to college, he majored in physics, graduated with honors, went on to space exploration for his postgraduate work, and then the pandemic hit and that shut it down. He was supposed to be doing his final project with NASA. He had gotten some internships with NASA, but the campus he was on shut down. So, so he came home. He said, "You know what? I don't really like doing research. It's really lonely. I want to be with people." I'm like, "Well, our plan may have backfired a little bit here." So he went to work at a homeless shelter. And from there, he got certified to be an EMT and then a paramedic. So he's currently a paramedic and a paramedic looking to get back into research. So, like I say, I'm just along for the ride, but I'm very proud of him. It took me forever to figure out what I was going to do with my life. So, I'm
Yeah.
grateful that he's got the courage to go out there and try it. And, he likes being a paramedic, but he said there's no follow through. You drop the people off and that's the end of it. And you move on to the next one. And, he wants to be involved in something that has a little more continuity and, more, and he
Mm,
really wants to get back into research. He misses the sciences.
mm,
As far as the stuttering goes, he still stutters. He definitely blocks and that kind of thing. It's much milder than it was when he was younger. And again, I just want to know that he speaks up and that he says what he wants to say. I don't care if he stutters. And, that's the point. People will come up to me and say, "Oh, he seems to be doing so well." I'm like, "Oh, just stop." Did you
yeah.
listen to what he said? No, I
Yeah.
don't say that to people, but you think it. Um, so yeah, he's doing great. He certainly has had girlfriends. I'm not sure if he has one now or not. I'm not, he's being a little coy on that one. Um, but yeah, he's doing great. He's doing great. Thank you for sharing that, Veronica, your experiences because as I said, they weren't. I think they are in general, they are very common. And in my Facebook group, I still have parents coming on who are having the exact same experience we had 28 years ago, So not enough has changed, but it's happening.
Yeah, but I think it's all it I think for me the important thing is that, as you said, parents should know the questions to ask. So when they,
Exactly.
and I certainly didn't. And when they go in to and I would talk to parents as well, but it's like go in and talk about what it is your child and you want from the session, not wait for the therapist to tell you what they're going to do. And I think sometimes parents, because maybe they lack knowledge, don't
Mhm.
know what to ask for. And I think there's a lot about how how we educate parents to ask the right questions.
Exactly. And I actually have a whole section on that where I talk about in my second book, just ask the right questions. That's what, the professionals or the support organizations will say, just ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And here are some of the questions. Does the therapist you're considering have training and experience to treat stuttering? Sure. Okay, good for you. What is their approach to stuttering? Well, if you don't even know there are many different approaches. Oh, well,
Mm,
I do stuttering modification, fluency shaping. Okay, great. Or I do holistic therapy. What does that mean? So these questions that we're supposed to be asking, we have to have some knowledge before we can really, use those answers. Oh, I love this one. Is their chosen approach a good match for you and your child's personality? I have no clue. What parent knows that? And so then you feel like maybe you should know that, and there's something wrong with you because you don't know that. What strategies do they teach? What programs influence their approach? What are the goals for therapy? So, and then I also talk about the narrative that's put out by many of the big organizations that, when you look at that from a parent's perspective, it sounded good to whoever wrote it, but when you put that in a parent's ear, you have to understand what parents are going to assume. They're going to make assumptions, and this is one parent that I interviewed, and Veronica, this will resonate with you. Sadly, when you're parenting, you don't know what you don't know. So you reach out and try to get information. You throw a dart in the dark and hope the dot that you're picking is the one most appropriate for the issue. You have no context to provide some degree of assessment. And say, yep, that's the problem. So, well then another thing, National Study Association, and they do a lot of good work. I don't want to throw them under the bus, but but here's something, I don't know if they still say this on their website, but back when I wrote this book, it did. Early intervention is the most effective way to help children overcome their speaking difficulties. So you're going to run them into interview to a speech therapist. How does a parent interpret that? Nobody has said, we don't know whether your child will overcome them or not. And, so, I mean, they just put out this message that's very, very misleading, and I think sets unrealistic and expectations for what a parent is looking for. And a parent, you ask a parent what they want. Well, I want them fixed. I just want this to stop. So, hopefully a speech therapist can walk a parent through that and kind of understand, the bigger picture for that. So yes, the questions, I would just laugh. I'm like, how am I supposed to answer that? I don't know anything about speech therapy.
Okay, Dori, can we go to Anita next? Because she just has her hands up, and then maybe Nick after that.
Thank you, Dori. I'm a huge fan of
Thank you, Anita.
yourself, which you know, because um you are the parent that I wish that I had. Because when I was was young, it was not my shame, it was the shame of my parents.
Mhm.
They felt shame and they put it on me. And I've done ch 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 children camps for 20 years, and youth youth camps for 30 years. And the kids always say, well, when we ask, what do you want? Then they say, I just want want to talk freely. I don't care that I stutter. I just want to speak. And then I want people to listen. And from parents, so, so much shame, so much guilt.
Mhm.
They 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 think that it's their fault. And so, so I think we should help parents to see that it's not their fault that if we stutter. I would love to have parents meet us adults who stutter and just
Mhm.
ask, well, what is it like? Does life end when you stutter?
Right.
And just to learn that it's not fun to stutter. You have lots of hurdles, but you can get there.
But yeah,
So to
exactly.
get yeah, so to the guilt and the shame, both from the children, but then also from the parents.
Right. And I write about that a little bit in my second book. The anxiety really impacts kids. The parents' anxiety really impacts kids. And there's another area that speech therapists can be of help by helping walk the parents through a process that helps them to, get rid of some of that anxiety. Because as you say, Anita, I'm sure you're greatly affected by the shame and the guilt that your parents felt, and that's one area I wished I had had more guidance on back when he was, when he was little. He's picking up on that. He's picking up on your anxiety. So that's very important. And Anita, I love all the work that you've done. I know you've worked so hard.
Thank you.
Okay, can we go to Nick next, though? I think Nick is next.
Thanks, Stephen. And thank you, Dori, for being with us today. Thank you also for your books. Both of them are absolutely amazing, and I sort of use them so much and hand them out to parents that I'm working with. They're really sort of invaluable to everything that sort of I think about and do in the work. I think, like, in the very first book that you wrote, there was like a real vulnerability. You sort of were really vulnerable in sharing your experience of sort of seeking speech therapy and wanting to have the therapy for your son. And you could sense sort of that desperation and the frustration that you talked about right at the start of today for us. I also think, like, I'm a speech and language therapist, so as a speech and language therapist reading that book for the first time, it was a really hard, painful read for me. It was really difficult to read at the time. So my question is around, because we know that when parents are coming into speech and language therapy, very often they're wanting a fix for the child because of the world that we live in. The world around the person and the families is so fluency focused, and there's a preference for fluency. So it's natural, I feel, that parents want something to support their child to become more fluent, to stutter less. What kind of tips would you give to a speech and language therapist, aside from all the wonderful resources that you've got online, the Facebook pages, etc.? What would you advise us? How would you help us to manage those kinds of questions that are coming in? What would be, like, maybe a top tip?
Wow, I think, first of all, thank you for passing my books on to parents, because I always say I wrote the book I wished I could have read. And, I think that most parents and speech therapists will read the books and they'll get it. They'll get it. And yeah, I've had people, I speak to a lot of universities, and I've had professors say, or students say, well, what if mother says, oh, I want it to be fixed? And you say, well, maybe we can't do that. And then they walk. Or, and I said, you know what? That happens. You're not going to do something that's going to cause harm. I mean, hopefully their explanation of why they don't feel the focus on the fix helps the parent make that shift, but if the parent is just adamant and they walk, but at least you've planted a seed, like, oh, this may not be a good thing to focus on. The top 10 tips, boy, Nick, I'm like, oh, I just be a good parent. We always feel like we have to do something really different, with these kids. And I think we just have to do more of the good stuff better, as far as, just keeping them talking and engaged and listening. And I mean, this isn't rocket science, So again, I appreciate so much you giving out my books, because that to me that was, my hope. But I think, and I think too, to assure parents that they're doing a great job, because we do feel like we failed. Man, I felt like I had failed over and over and over again. And I know Eli picked up on that. But I think to really get across to parents, this isn't an easy journey. I don't have any, immediate answers for you. We need to talk about expectations and, help them understand the context of it all. And parents can learn, I mean, Nick, you said it was hard for you to read the first book, and I know so many speech therapists have been so invested in a certain way of doing things. It really is tough to make a shift and start doing things a little differently. But yeah, I think just assuring them that the things they can do just as a parent to provide the guidance and support that kid's going to need, and to focus on the feelings and the emotions, and and trying to, many kids who stutter tend to be perfectionists, so it's always good to allow them to not be perfectionists. And yeah, so I don't have any, I wish I had a top 10 I could give you. I just say read the book. But yeah, it's just being a good parent. Whatever advice I give to the parent who has a child who stutters can be given to a parent who has any child, especially if the child has some challenges that they're having to work through. So, yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Brilliant, Nick. Thank you very much. Can we go to Mary next? Mary, I've seen.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Dori. Yeah, your book is a wonderful resource. But I have a question about teachers, because I work as a speech and language therapist, and I find that 95% of parents will get once they get your message, the message that we're kind of giving around, they will be relieved that, a lot of them, but there will be some that struggle. And I think often the role of school and teachers is important, because the parents are very influenced if school is sort of commenting on if school see it as a problem, either in terms of participation or performance of academic stuff, and then I think the parents worry about that. They worry about it being a difficulty for the child, a negative experience education wise. I'm wondering what you say to parents about how to handle teachers' comments.
Well, I think that they need to talk to the teachers up front at the beginning, and help the teachers understand what will be helpful for their child, because teachers, just like parents, they don't know, we don't know. I think that a good speech therapist, in our schools, most of our schools have speech therapists, and oftentimes those speech therapists are kind of the advocates to the teacher for that child, and they can also work with the teacher to answer their questions. I think I get the bottom line too. I mean, I get messages from parents in my Facebook group. The kid got bullied, or the teacher said something. My son had a couple of instances with teachers that were really just not good. Blew my mind. But I think speech therapists can really, and there's always that idea of doing a presentation to the class if the child is comfortable. My son would not have done that in a million years. And I see now it was the shame and the guilt. It wasn't, it would have been really good for him to have done that. But so, I just think every case is going to be different. The important thing isn't so much keeping these things from happening, keeping teachers from saying the wrong thing, or keeping students and for the child to have a foundation to get through that, and that you as a parent also can get through it. You're not going to be crushed and devastated when somebody teases your kid or the teacher. You can handle it, stay calm, and get through it and move on. So yeah, teachers have a very, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to add one more thing. I don't want to hog all the time, but as you were talking, and I know Stephen probably knows this because sometimes Stephen is great. He comes and talks to, groups and then for us. But some children become adolescents who, in spite of having parents who have done their very best to cope with all their own sense of inadequacy. So, maybe they haven't been able to get rid of it. They have still worries that maybe, and guilt. And sometimes, we've worked with their teachers and said, the teachers might ring us saying, oh my God, and we would say, it's okay, he's really confident and just talk to him. Have you talked to him about it? And so on. But sometimes then there's an age, sometimes when kids go through adolescence, I suppose, and no, in spite of everything, they go through a stage where just because of being human, they hate it. They just want rid of it. They stop communicating. They may seem depressed. And they've had everything. They've had stammer affirming kind of people in their lives in different ways. But no matter what they go through, it's like a stage that people just maybe have to go through. I'm not sure. And it's not, again, it's a smaller proportion of the group of kids I would work with. Just kind of like, have you, like, in the voices that you listen to, did you hear those kind of stories, or what would you respond to that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, as you said, they're just being human, whether it's because they stutter or they have red hair or they have, bad teeth or whatever the issue might be. There's always something out there. And teenage years are really hard. They're frustrating, as are the 20s. I keep telling my kids, 20s are tough. But I think that, I think it's important for parents to not overreact and not beat themselves up. Say, what did I do wrong? Why is he reacting this way? Why is she reacting this way? And
that's sometimes when parents will come to us and say, like, are you sure? Are you sure you can't do something? Are you sure you can, Just sorry, now there's just somebody called at the door. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to just go off camera. But thank you. Just 2 seconds, John. Okay.
Mary.
No, I'm just sorry, I'm just on a call.
So I was gonna say something, but then I forgot. It went away.
I think that it can be quite an interesting time, just what you were talking about, Dori, the kind of different stages. Even the 20s can be quite difficult because maybe it's the different stages then that we are going through. So maybe we had the safety net of school and college, and then we're going.
You're cutting out on me, Stephen.
Sorry, I was actually just saying, like, it's the different kind of stages that we go through. So we could go from the stage of school into college, into university, but then on to work and the different challenges that we have there.
I think one of the things that came across in the book and that I've found myself is to do everything you can to help those kids talk about what they're going through. And as a parent, that they know that you're not going to be devastated by their pain or that you can handle it. It's okay. And I know my son is Dwight in the book, by the way. But he said something about, he said, like I said, what would you tell parents about it? Because talking about it was one of the biggest issues that came up. Kids were, my parents wouldn't talk to me about it, and I couldn't talk to them about it. I was afraid it would upset them too much, that sort of thing. So I asked my son, at this time he was like 25 or something. I said, what advice can you give to parents for, talking about it? He said, you might bring it up and it may not go well, but that's okay. Just keep bringing it up so they know that door is open. That's what they need to know, Zadora. I felt so good hearing him say that, because even to this day, there are times when, I think, should I talk to him about it? Should I, whatever. So, and that was one of the biggest things that came out in the book. My parents wouldn't talk to me about it, or I didn't feel I could talk to my parents about it. And I think addressing, the depression and the fear and the shame and all that, man, you got to be the best listeners in the world.
Mary, can I just ask, is one thing that you want to add just before I go on to the next person that has
No, that was great. Thank you, Dori. That was good to hear. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for the question. So good.
So can we just go to now? My apologies in advance if I get your name wrong. Gaurav?
Gaurav. Yeah, I think Stephen, for you primarily, like for the Irish people, it's similar to Gaurav Mahagut. So Gaurav Mileva, so it's very same to that.
Brilliant.
So it's an easy way to remember. I'm sorry, my video is off because I'm doing the bedtime for two toddlers here, 2-year-old and 3.5-year-old. So there's a bit of a mess around me, but it's my first time because I think it was great, Dori, and everybody else to share your experience. I'm here primarily because I'm seeing the starting of the study in a 3.5-year-old. And like we didn't know, we went through a lot of support from the speech therapist in the beginning saying that it's a speech delay until end of this year. It became very prominent that his stutter was becoming more and more visible. It came to a point where he started giving up his sentences. He started looking at us frustrated. He started pulling out his tongue, and of course, it started bothering us. So, and like you said, I don't know what we want. Of course, as a parent, we want it to go away, but all where we are is, I think we're just going from relying on both public speech therapists right now to seeking the private one, and then they assess us to say that, oh, maybe it's something related to the growth. It's neuro, but it may be something with the growth. There might be cases that it can also be autism. Nobody can say anything, but it's just everywhere we go, we just get to know something more. And we're just right now going from one thing to another, but just to find the answer on. And like, I think, Anita, you said that, I mean, we don't have a guilt right now, but we don't want to have a guilt of something that we didn't do for him early enough. And that's where we are right now. And again, like, we don't know, having him like this at the age of 5, if he has to school, which school will be less difficult for him. We don't know right now. We always thought we're going to send him to a public, but now we think maybe a smaller private will be better for him. Like, all those things, we don't have the answer. But that's why I looked for this group, came here, and like, I don't have a specific question, but I think it was more about to understand that, like, I don't know. Like, I think I'll go to the question that you said, because you're right, I didn't know the questions to ask, but some questions you shared were useful. And I don't know if you think, like, is this too early to worry right now, or is it the right time to start worrying, or I don't know if anything right now.
Is it the right time to start worrying? You know what? As soon as your baby's born, you start to worry. It doesn't matter whether they stutter or not. So, I think that, good for you for being here and for exploring, because, that's kind of my point. I want parents to go out and really explore, what are the options? What can happen? And the sad thing is that, it's one thing to say, well, we don't know what causes it, or to tell a parent, you didn't cause it. But on the other hand, you can, as a parent, do things to make it worse, to increase the tension, or you can do things to make it better. I've always bothered when they say, oh, tell the parents, or, they didn't do anything wrong. Well, maybe they did, parents have a hard time with that. But I just think we need to know that we can have an impact. And I think that, you feel like you need to do something right now. There's so many things you can do with your 2.5-year-old, just to kind of follow their lead and let them gab and play and just be happy, and not be overwhelmingly harsh on them. But there's so much you can do, even with a 2.5-year-old, I think, to kind of build that foundation that is needed if he does keep stuttering, and I think there's just that feeling that, oh, well, and like when I read the NSA thing, sooner you get them in, the, more apt they are to recover. Well, that's just not true. So let's pretend like they're not going to recover. Let's
Yeah,
treat them,
yeah. So like
let's treat them like they're not going to. What should we give them then?
yeah, I think he's 3.5, and to my point, like when we moved from the public to the private therapist, and she expertise in study. Now we didn't ask the question about the approaches, but we did ask about that's what her experience is. And by listening to her story, the moment she said that it might never go away, of course, it was hard for us as a parent to hear that part. And now I think, which I'm not sure right now, is to say that we don't know which approach is better. Is it going to be more bad to continue with both the speech therapists, one that's come from the government and one that's private, or that's a bad idea? That we should just find one and stick to one?
I think like I say, you're doing the right thing now. You need to learn and understand the options, and then you're able to understand what each of those therapists has to offer
Okay.
and how you feel about that. Because every speech therapist is going to be different. And there are school-based speech therapists who are absolutely fabulous. There are other school-based speech therapists who know nothing about stuttering. And there are private therapists who are great and others who are not. So I think, you're doing the right thing by being here. I hope you'll have an opportunity to read my work, because then I think you'll know what questions to go in. You'll have a better feel for what it is you're looking for. And you you may not agree with what I'm looking for, but at least you'll have a broader perspective on be able to make those kinds of decisions that you're looking at right now, because it we don't have a crystal ball. It's really hard to
Yeah.
know.
Okay. Okay. And last thing, and I'm not sure, maybe Dory, you know it, or Stephen, you would know it. Like how do we identify or meet? Like you said, I think someone said that meeting other kids was good for their kid who's stammer. So like, how do we find out? Is it too early for me to find parents whose kids stutter, or like how do we find that those people with that community?
Well, there are some online parent support groups. Friends has one that I take part in quite often. And they also have teen support groups and child support groups as your child gets older. But and then the NSA, I believe, has a parent support group too. And I think it's just wonderful to be able to connect, with parents who are also dealing with this. So the NSA, and now I'm just coming from the United States, so I'm naming those that are in the US, the NSA and the Friends organization. I imagine, I know, Anita, you're involved in a lot of things internationally, and Stephen, you too. But find a support group. And I think here we go. Here we go. If you're in the UK, Stamma, yeah, UK Stamma. Yes, that's right. I
So,
actually,
and also here in Ireland, so we have the Irish Stammering Association, and actually Veronica actually runs the parent support group as well.
yeah, so I think that's one thing we can sort of thank the pandemic for. The online resources are far greater than they were, and I think we're more comfortable, going down that road. So I would really encourage you to engage in some of those parent support groups, and do more than one. You can do as many as you want. They don't cost anything, and decide which
Yeah.
one you feel most comfortable with.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
And
Thank you.
if I can just add, I know the point was made about children who stutter connecting with each other. I think it's so important for parents of children who stutter to connect with each other, because sometimes there's just a great comfort in knowing that other parents are struggling with the same sort of questions that you have, and just the not being alone part even, and just the reassurance that you know you are doing your best. And I think parents by and large, same speech and language therapist in most cases, are trying to do their best. So
absolutely.
Gaurav, as Dori said, being here now is a great thing for you to do, and a great starting point for trying to learn how to support your child, whether he continues to stutter or not.
Sorry, Stephen. Can I just come in on that as well? Because I work with Veronica on the adult support group. And it always occurs to me that it would be good for parents of children who stutter to speak with adults who have stuttered, and still stutter, like ourselves. And we never get parents joining the adult support group. So it might be no harm to actually join that the odd time, to just listen, or to ask, or it just I think adults who stutter can reflect what they can expect to some extent for their children, and put their minds at rest, So
absolutely, yeah. I think the adults who stutter have so much to offer. I think probably about a third of my Facebook group is adults who stutter.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely spot on. To have parents be able to talk to those adults and get that long view again, that's, it's really important.
And if I could just say to Gaurav that I've had a good life with my stammer, and I've gone through certain things and details, and like it could be just worthwhile, to discuss these issues with adults who have been kids, because a lot of us have been kids, so to speak. Okay.
No, you're right, and I was ready for that, and I think in Ireland there was supposed to be a walk that was tomorrow that got cancelled and rescheduled. So I planned for that, and again with the kids I was tentative, but yes, I'm absolutely looking forward to those conversations. 100%.
Good.
I'm all up for it. Yeah. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I know our son, he was a teenager when he went to these stuttering support group meetings with the students and adults, but he got a lot out of hearing from other adults. That was hugely beneficial to him, to hear of their experiences. But parents too, to listen to other adults. And that's kind of why I wrote the second book. I wanted to be able to take parents into the therapy. This is what the experience was like, so, but yes, I think the adults have so much to offer. We need to listen.
I just think that Anita just had a hand up there a second ago. If you want to make a comment, Anita, no, okay, sorry. Okay, so we are now just coming up to 8:20. So maybe does anyone have any final comments or questions? Sorry, Mary, you're just on mute.
Yeah, I know. I just have one thing I wanted to say to Dori, that I had told quite a number of parents about this, but it is midterm here in school. I think some parents were maybe just traveling or whatever, but it would be great to have the recording, Stephen. So thank you for making the recording, because we'll be able to share the recording. So that's great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for doing that. And my website, I just had my website updated. So it has more information, more up-to-date information, and it's www.voiceunearthed.com. And I think, it's the information there is more up to date, and I'd be happy to share that too.
Brilliant. I can just see Nick just has your hand up there, Nick, if you want to jump in.
Sorry, I think I'm being really annoying now by keeping everybody waiting and holding the call on. But Dori, I was just sort of interested to hear whether you'd noticed any changes more recently in the therapies that are out there. You obviously mentioned like arts and other therapies like Blank Center, etc. but I just wondered, like, going to the conferences and seeing, are you seeing stammering affirming therapies and hope being much more hopeful in terms of what's on offer for kids who stammer?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The Friends organization, that's the one that I'm closest to and that I, attend their conferences usually. They're right in line with what I'm feeling. I mean, they're very supportive of my work as I am of theirs. The NSA I haven't been as involved with. Um, but it's definitely a time of transition, and there's all kinds of conversations going on out there right now. Anita, you know this oh so well. And some of them are kind of alarming. But I think, we just have to stick to our guns, and we know we know what not to do. So, as far as what we should do, that's wide open. But yes, it's definitely changing. I'm so encouraged. Go to the Friends Conference, and every speech therapist there, they're on, they're totally aligned with my message. And well, maybe not totally. They may have some disagreements, but in general, it's just so encouraging to meet those people and talk with them and know that things are changing. And does my heart good to know that, because they really needed to change, but not changing quickly enough. I still have too many parents having the experience that we had. So,
and Dori, can I just ask, have you seen a change in parents, as in like a parents more willing to speak up more now, or like have you seen any change in parents just from talking to them over the years?
I hope so. I think parents, when my first book came out, there's some pushback from, well, she's a parent. What does she know? She doesn't stutter. She's not a speech therapist. Why should I read her book? I think parents have a lot to offer too. And I hope that maybe my work has sort of opened those doors a little bit more, where the profession is more respectful of parents and realize that, parents can be educated, they have a lot to offer. And, I think that to include parents, that holistic therapy, to include parents in the therapy process is so key. And more and more and more of that is happening. It's difficult though, because in the school system, of course, parents are working. And then in the United States, insurance oftentimes gives the impression that if you can't prove you've lowered the percent syllable stuttered, then there's that measure that always comes to light. So, but there are certain organizations, like I say, the American Institute for Stuttering, they don't take insurance. So they don't have any of those parameters. They can do whatever they want. I don't mean whatever they want, but so I just think parents are so important to the whole conversation, so important. And so I hope that's changing. I hope, and I think it is. I think it is. I think just the speech therapists I talk to in the relationships that they have with, their clients' parents is definitely much healthier than ours was.
Brilliant, Dori. Thanks. So maybe we can kind of just start to kind of wrap things up. So I would just like to thank Dori first, actually, for just coming on and giving up your time for us, and it was actually great. And also just to thank everyone else for the kind of brilliant questions and the insight then that you guys were also able to share here on the Zoom. So we will have this recording will be up on the resource page soon. So if you just keep checking just the Irish Stammering Association website, and then you will be able to find it there. So just to finish, just to say thank you very much to everyone here.
Yes, thank you for the great questions and for being here. It just means a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen.
Bye for now. Bye.
Thank you, Stephen.
Bye.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Dori.
See you.
Thank you.